The air on the movie set was thick with the scent of sawdust, stale coffee, and the faint metallic tang of ambition. Lights blazed down from above, hot and unforgiving, making the already long days feel even longer. Elvis Presley, in a crisp suit that felt more like a costume than clothes, stood under one of these unforgiving lights, his jaw tight. Another take, another line, another perfectly rehearsed gesture. It was 1960, and he was at the peak of his fame, a supernova in a world still figuring out what to do with him. But even supernovas could feel the grind. He'd arrived on set before dawn as usual. Had his hair styled into that iconic pompadour, his makeup meticulously applied. He'd run his lines, practiced his marks, and now, here he was, ready to pretend to be someone else, to feel something he wasn't really feeling in the moment. The scene today was a tense one. A dramatic confrontation where his character, a rugged, misunderstood hero, had to draw a gun. A prop gun, of course. Heavy, cold, and utterly fake. Director Arthur Finch stood behind the camera, a stern, unyielding presence. Finch was known for his precision, his demand for perfection, and his almost legendary lack of humor on set. He was a good director, no doubt, but sometimes Elvis thought he forgot that the people in front of his lens were, well, people. Living, breathing individuals, not just puppets to manipulate. "All right, Elvis, let's get this one perfect." Finch's voice boomed, amplified by the set's acoustics. Intensity. Remember the motivation. This is the moment everything changes for your character. Elvis nodded, adjusting his tie. He knew the motivation. He'd read the script 100 times. He could recite the lines in his sleep, but there was a hollowness today, a feeling that something essential was missing. The joy, maybe the spontaneity, that had once defined him. Every move was choreographed, every emotion manufactured. He missed the raw energy of a live show, the unpredictable roar of the crowd. Here it was all controlled, too controlled. He looked around the set. Crew members moved with practiced efficiency, their faces serious, mirroring Finch's focus. The clatter of equipment, the hushed whispers of the makeup artists, the distant murmur of the prop master polishing something shiny. It was a well-oiled machine, and he was a cog in it, a very famous, very expensive cog. As he waited for his cue, his gaze drifted to a small, cluttered table at the edge of the set. Someone's lunchbox, a stack of worn scripts, and a flash of bright primary colors. He squinted. It was a toy. A small plastic water gun, shaped like a futuristic ray gun, probably belonging to one of the younger crew members' kids who had visited set earlier. It looked so out of place amidst the serious equipment, almost like a defiant splash of childhood rebellion. A faint smile touched Elvis's lips. A water gun, so simple, so innocent, yet in this environment it felt like an alien beacon. An absurd thought sparked in his mind like a tiny firecracker, going off in the quiet hum of the studio. What if he dismissed it instantly? No, that was madness. Finch would have a fit, his manager would have a heart attack. It would be unprofessional, chaotic, maybe even career-ending. But the thought, once planted, refused to leave. Buzzed at the back of his mind a mischievous little hum. He thought of the scene again. He pulls the gun. He aims it. He's supposed to be filled with rage, with a desperate need for justice. But what if, instead of rage, there was joy? What if, instead of a loud bang, there was a quiet, harmless squirt? The idea was ridiculous, and yet it felt freeing, like a breath of fresh air in this stale, controlled atmosphere. It was something unpredictable, something human, something that might just break the oppressive tension, that might just suspirate. Like a shroud. He imagined the looks on their faces, Finch's especially. Would he turn purple? Would he explode? Or would something else happen? The bell rang, signaling the start of the take. Places everyone. Finch called out, his voice sharp. Elvis walked to his mark, the prop gun now in his hand. feeling its familiar weight, but his mind was no longer solely on the scene. It was on that small, colorful plastic toy. A wild, rebellious, utterly un-Elvis-like idea was taking root. He had to be careful. He had to be subtle. But suddenly the prospect of the next take, the next long day, didn't feel quite so grim. For the first time all week, a genuine spark of mischief, and something akin to excitement, flickered within him. He was Elvis Presley, after all. The king, and sometimes even a king, needed to make his own fun. The spark of an idea in Elvis's mind grew into a tiny flame, warming him from the inside out. He spent the rest of the morning takes in a strange state of heightened awareness. His ears perked for any opportunity, his eyes scanning for the water gun. He played the scenes, delivered his lines, but a part of his mind was already plotting. He knew he had to act fast before the prop master put everything away for the lunch break, or worse, before the water gun's owner came looking for it. During a quick setup change for a new camera angle, the set buzzed with activity. Crew members repositioned lights, adjusted backdrops, and shuffled cables. This was his chance. He watched the prop master, a burly man named Gus, with a perpetually tired expression, place the prop gun on a small trolley loaded with other items. Gus turned his back for a moment, distracted by a conversation with a grip about a stubborn light stand. Elvis moved with a casual grace that belied his true purpose. He walked past the trolley, seemingly just stretching his legs. His hand, quick as a viper, snatched the prop gun. He didn't even look at it, just slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket, where it pressed uncomfortably against his ribs. No one seemed to notice. Gus was still arguing about the light. Perfect. Now for the water gun. He circled back towards the edge of the set, trying to look like he was simply enjoying a moment of quiet reflection. His eyes darted to the table where he'd seen the toy. It was still there, a beacon of brightly colored plastic. He approached it, pretending to examine a script lying nearby. With another swift practice movement, he scooped up the water gun, tucking it into the same pocket as the real prop. The real prop gun was heavy, cold. The water gun was light, almost flimsy, the plastic cool against his fingers. The contrast was stark, almost comical. He could feel the small bulge in his jacket, a secret that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. He retreated to his dressing room for the lunch break, the stolen goods still hidden. Once inside, he locked the door and pulled out his loot. He laid them side by side on the small table. The genuine-looking prop gun designed to look menacingly real, and the silly, brightly colored water pistol with its clear plastic reservoir, promising only a harmless splash. Elvis picked up the water gun. It was a simple mechanism, a trigger, a nozzle. He found a small faucet in his dressing room and carefully filled the reservoir. He tested it. A thin, surprisingly strong stream of water shot across the room, hitting the opposite wall with a soft splat. He grinned. Perfect. A wave of nervous energy washed over him. What was he doing? This wasn't a live concert where he could improvise and charm his way out of anything. This was a tightly controlled movie set, with millions of dollars at stake. Director Finch was a serious man, a very, very serious man. He could get fired. He could be blacklisted. The headlines would be brutal. Elvis the Clown, King of Pranks, derails Hollywood production. Then he thought of the endless days, the manufactured smiles, the feeling of being a puppet on a string. He thought of the weary faces of the crew, the tension that seemed to crackle in the air. Someone needed to lighten the mood. Someone needed to break the monotony. And maybe, just maybe, that someone was him. He looked at his reflection in the mirror. His eyes, usually filled with a playful sparkle, had felt dull lately, dimmed by the relentless pace. Now they were bright, alive with mischief. This wasn't about being disrespectful. It was about being human. It was about reminding everyone, including himself, that joy could still exist even in the most rigid of environments. He carefully placed the loaded water gun into the prop holster he'd be wearing for the afternoon scene. The fit was a little awkward, but he could make it work. He hid the real prop gun at the bottom of his laundry bag, deciding he'd return it secretly after the deed was done. The knock on his door startled him. "Elvis? 5 minutes till we're back on." It was his assistant. "Be right there," he called out, his voice sounding a little too cheerful. He took a deep breath, smoothing down his suit. His heart pounded, a drum solo in his chest. This was it. There was no turning back now. He was about to replace a symbol of violence with an emblem of childish fun. He was about to shake up the serious world of Hollywood, one squirt at a time. And for the first time in a long time, Elvis Presley felt truly alive, truly himself. The king was about to play a prank. The afternoon sun, simulated by powerful studio lights, felt even hotter than before. Elvis stood on his mark, the weight of the water gun in his holster feeling surprisingly heavy, not because of its actual mass, but because of the immense secret it carried. He could feel the cool plastic against his hip, a constant reminder of the audacious stunt he was about to pull. Director Arthur Finch was in rare form today, barking out instructions with an almost military precision. "Remember your blocking, Elvis. This is a pivotal moment. Every eye will be on you." Finch paced in front of the camera, his hand gesture sharp and emphatic. He wasn't yelling exactly, but his voice carried an undeniable authority, a palpable intensity that seemed to drain the very air of lightness. The scene involved a tense standoff in a dusty saloon set. Other actors were already in place, the villain sneering by a card table, and a couple of grim-faced henchmen. The air crackled with manufactured tension. Everyone on set seemed to hold their breath, waiting for Finch's dreaded action. Elvis exchanged a nervous glance. "Was Stella thou character's loverist?" She gave him a small, encouraging smile. She had no idea. He watched the crew members, their faces illuminated by the set lights. The focus puller hunched over his camera, his brow furrowed in concentration. The sound mixer adjusting dials on his complicated equipment. The boom operator holding the long mic pole steady above their heads. They were all professionals, dedicated to their craft, and he was about to introduce a chaotic, unpredictable element into their perfectly orchestrated world. His stomach fluttered with a mix of fear and exhilaration. Was this a terrible idea? Maybe he should just put the real gun back. Then he remembered the dullness, the sense of being disconnected from his own spark. No, this felt right in a crazy, illogical way. It felt like a small act of rebellion, a way to inject a bit of his true self into the polished, controlled world of Hollywood. Practice drawing the water gun from the holster a few times subtly when no one was looking directly at him. The motion felt a little clumsy with the lighter plastic, but he figured he could mask it with his performance. He just had to make sure he aimed it correctly and didn't accidentally soak the camera lens. That would be an immediate giveaway. Finch called for silence. The usual hushed murmurs on set died down, replaced by the faint hum of equipment. The air grew heavy, pregnant with expectation. This was the moment, the climactic draw. "All right, everyone." Finch's voice cut through the silence, sharp and clear. "This is take 7. Let's make it the one. Elvis Remage. You're cornered, but you're not defeated. You're making your stand. Show us that fire, King." Elvis nodded, swallowing hard. Fire. Oh, there would be fire, all right. Just not the kind Finch was expecting. His heart hammered against his ribs. He could feel a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. Not just from the heat of the lights, but from the sheer audacity of what he was about to do. He took a deep breath, trying to channel his nervous energy into something resembling his character's intensity. He looked at the villain, his eyes narrowed. He felt the familiar adrenaline rush that always came before a performance, but this time it was laced with a delicious, dangerous thrill and action. Finch bellowed. The scene began. Dialogue was exchanged, tense and clipped. Elvis delivered his lines, his voice low and gravelly, just as Finch wanted. He walked towards the villain, his boots scuffing slightly on the dusty floorboards. The villain sneered, reaching slowly for his own prop gun. This was it, the moment Elvis's hand flew to his holster. His fingers wrapped around the plastic grip of the water gun. The lightness of it was startling, almost comical in his hand. He pulled it out, aimed, and prepared to press the trigger. His finger hovered. He closed his eyes for a split second, a silent prayer that this wouldn't be the end of his career. Then, with a burst of mischievous courage, he opened them wide, a playful glint in their depths, and squeezed. The camera rolled, the lights hummed, and the dramatic music that would later be added to the scene seemed to play in Elvis's head. His character, fueled by righteous anger, advanced on the smirking villain, a man named Sterling Vance, who was known for his incredible ability to stay in character no matter what. This was the moment the confrontation that drew Elvis's hand, quick and practiced, went to his hip. He felt the smooth plastic of the water gun, so different from the cold steel of the prop he was meant to use. His thumb found the small ridged trigger. He pulled it from the holster with a flourish, his arm extending, the nozzle pointing directly at Sterling Vance's face. Sterling, still in character, widened his eyes in a show of mock surprise, preparing for the dramatic visual effect of a bullet seemingly tearing through the air beside him. He flinched as rehearsed. Instead of the expected loud bang of a blank cartridge, or even the dull click of an empty prop gun, there was a soft, almost comical squirt. A thin, surprisingly accurate stream of water shot from the nozzle, arcing gracefully through the bright studio lights. It flew across the carefully constructed set. Bypassing Sterling's eyes, Elvis had aimed low just in case, and landed with a delicate splash right on the tip of Sterling Vance's nose. For a split second, total silence descended on the set. The only sound was the faint hum of the cameras and the soft, almost inaudible drip as a single droplet of water rolled off Sterling Vance's nose. Sterling's eyes, still wide with mock surprise from his character's reaction, now genuinely widened. His brow furrowed. He slowly reached up a hand and touched the tip of his nose, feeling the unexpected wetness. His theatrical sneer slowly melted away, replaced by an expression of utter bewilderment. He looked at Elvis, then down at the water gun in Elvis's hand, then back at Elvis. His mouth opened slightly as if to speak, but no words came out. Elvis, meanwhile, stood absolutely still, the water gun held steady. A slow, mischievous grin spread across his face, starting at the corners of his mouth and crinkling the famous eyes. He tried to keep a straight face, but it was impossible. A silent laugh was bubbling up inside him, threatening to burst free. The absurdity of the situation, the utter unexpectedness of it all was too much. Behind the camera, director Arthur Finch, who had been leaning forward completely engrossed in the scene, suddenly froze. His face, usually a mask of intense concentration, slowly transformed. His eyes, fixed on the monitor, had first shown confusion, then disbelief. His mouth, previously a thin, stern line, now hung slightly agape. Crew members who had been focused on their tasks also seemed to sense that something was profoundly off. The boom operator, who had been carefully tracking Elvis's movements, lowered his mic a fraction, his head tilted. The focus puller stopped adjusting his lens, his hand hovering. A few grips, standing ready with reflectors, slowly lowered them, their expressions mirroring Finch's. No one moved, no one spoke. It was like a freeze frame in a movie, except it was real life. The entire set, usually a hive of activity, was eerily still. All eyes were on Elvis, and on the small, unassuming water gun in his hand. Sterling Vance finally managed to speak, his voice a bewildered whisper. Did you just squirt me?" Elvis couldn't hold it in any longer. A deep, rumbling chuckle started in his chest and escaped his lips, low at first, then growing into a full, unrestrained laugh. It was a laugh that felt genuine, unrestrained, and wonderfully contagious. It bounced off the studio walls, echoing in the sudden quiet. He looked directly at Sterling Vance, his eyes sparkling with pure, unadulterated joy. The silence on the set stretched for another beat, charged with confusion and anticipation. What would Finch do? Would he explode in a fit of rage? Would he cancel the entire production? The answer was about to come. The sound of Elvis's laugh, raw and unrestrained, bounced off the walls of the studio, cutting through the stunned silence like a sharp, unexpected note. Sterling Vance, still wiping a single drop of water from his nose, looked from Elvis to the water gun, then back to the king, a bewildered grin slowly forming on his own face. The other actors, initially frozen, began to stir, a few tentative chuckles starting to break through, but all eyes were on director Arthur Finch. He was the thundercloud, the ultimate authority on this set, and the prank had landed squarely in his meticulously planned universe. His face was a study in controlled chaos. His jaw was clenched so tight, the muscles bulged. His eyes, normally sharp and piercing, seemed to be processing a monumental breach of protocol. He stood perfectly still behind the camera, his hand still poised over the cut button, as if waiting for his brain to catch up with the impossible reality. His usual stern expression deepened, a furrow appearing between his brows. The crew braced themselves. This was it, the explosion, the tirade. The moment Elvis would-be read the riot act, perhaps even escorted off the set. His face began to redden, a slow flush rising from his neck. His nostrils flared slightly. He opened his mouth as if to deliver a scathing rebuke. But no words came out. He looked at Elvis, still laughing, then at the water gun, then back at Sterling Vance, who was now fully chuckling. The last vestiges of his character's menace completely gone. Elvis's laugh was infectious. It wasn't a mocking laugh, but a laugh of pure, unburdened joy. A sound that hadn't been heard on this set in weeks. It was a sound that belonged to the real Elvis, the playful-matic showman, not the carefully constructed movie star. Finch's chest seemed to inflate as if he were taking a massive, outraged breath. His eyes, still narrowed, darted around the set. He saw the bewildered, then slowly amused faces of the crew. He saw the other actors trying to stifle their own smiles. He saw his carefully orchestrated, highly dramatic scene devolve into pure, unscripted farce. A muscle twitched in his jaw. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. The silence, broken only by Elvis's diminishing chuckles, stretched on. It felt like an eternity. The tension was almost unbearable. Then something happened, something entirely unexpected. A small sound escaped Finch's lips. It was almost imperceptible at first, a tiny, almost choked-off sound. It wasn't a yell. It wasn't a sigh of exasperation. It was a snort. A small, involuntary snort of air, like someone trying to hold back a sneeze but failing. His shoulders, which had been rigid with tension, seemed to give a tiny, almost imperceptible shake. His eyes, still fixed on Elvis, seemed to soften just a fraction. Another sound, a low, guttural rumble, started deep in his chest. It was a strange sound, unfamiliar on the stoic director. The redness in his face, which had been building with suppressed rage, now seemed to transform, not into a deeper crimson, but into a more diffused, almost embarrassed flush. His mouth, which had been open in silent fury, now twitched. The corners of his lips, which had never seemed to move except to issue commands, began to curl upwards, ever so slightly. And then, almost as if it had been forced out of him by an irresistible internal pressure, a single solitary chuckle escaped Arthur Finch. It was a hesitant, rusty sound, as if his laugh muscles hadn't been used in years, but it was definitely a chuckle. It was quickly followed by another, stronger one, and then another. And then slowly, gradually, director Arthur Finch, the stern, unyielding purveyor of dramatic precision, began to laugh. Not a polite titter, but a deep, booming, chest-shaking laugh that started slow and then gained momentum, filling the entire studio. It was a sound so unexpected, so powerful, that it silenced even Elvis's own laughter. The set was now completely quiet again, but this time it was a silence of pure, astonished wonder. The stern director was laughing, and it was clear by the sound and the way his entire body shook with mirth that this was not a laugh of anger, but one of genuine, unbridled amusement. Arthur Finch's laughter, when it finally broke free, was like a dam bursting. It started as a low rumble, then swelled into a booming, infectious sound that vibrated through the very foundations of the studio. It was a sound so unexpected from the stern director that it caught everyone off guard. His face, which had been red with suppressed fury, now gleamed with unadulterated mirth. Tears actually starting to well in the corners of his eyes. Clutched his stomach, bending over slightly, his body shaking with the force of his amusement. "Elvis," he gasped between peals of laughter, trying to get a word out but failing. You absolute rascal." The sight of their formidable director dissolving into such genuine hearty laughter was contagious. Sterling Vance, who had been watching in astonishment, let out a whoop of delight, clutching his own stomach. "I thought I was going to get shot," he exclaimed, wiping a tear of laughter from his eye. "A water gun? Oh, you got me good, King." The other actors, who had been holding their breath, let out a collective sigh of relief and then burst into their own laughter. Stella, Elvis's co-star, giggled, putting a hand over her mouth. "I didn't know what was happening," she confessed, her eyes sparkling with amusement. Then the crew joined in. The boom operator lowered his pole completely, leaning against a support beam, shaking with silent laughter. The focus puller let out a guffaw. The grips, the lighting technicians, the makeup artists, one by one. They succumbed to the sheer absurdity and unexpected joy of the moment. The tension that had clung to the set for weeks, heavy and oppressive, suddenly shattered into a million pieces. The studio moments before a scene of grim drama was now filled with the glorious cacophonous sound of human laughter. It was loud, joyful, and utterly liberating. Elvis, who had been watching Finch with a mixture of trepidation and anticipation, felt a massive weight lift from his shoulders. He hadn't realized how much he'd been bracing for a furious reprimand. Seeing Finch, the stoic, unyielding Arthur Finch, laugh so heartily filled him with an unexpected warmth. This wasn't just relief. It was something deeper, a connection. Put the water gun down on a nearby prop table, the small, brightly colored toy now looking like a beacon of rebellion and triumph. He walked towards Finch, a wide, genuine smile on his face. Finch finally managed to straighten up, wiping the tears from his eyes with the back of his hand. His chest still heaved with lingering chuckles, and his shoulders still gave an occasional tremor. He looked at Elvis, his eyes still bright with mirth. "Elvis," he said, his voice still a little hoarse from laughter, "I have never in my entire career seen anything like that." He shook his head, a genuine smile plastered across his face. "A water gun. You replaced a prop gun with a water gun on my set." He burst into another round of chuckles. "I'm sorry, Mr. Finch," Elvis said, though his eyes were twinkling mischievously. I just thought we all needed a little bit of a laugh." Finch waved a dismissive hand, still grinning. "A little bit of a laugh. You nearly gave me a heart attack, you scamp." But there was no anger in his voice, only a profound, almost grateful amusement. He looked around at the still laughing crew with the relaxed faces of the actors. The atmosphere had completely transformed. The air felt lighter, clearer. "Well," Finch said, taking a deep breath, a final fading chuckle escaping him. "I suppose that was one way to break the tension." He then did something even more surprising. He reached out and clapped Elvis on the shoulder, a firm, approving pat. "All right, everyone, take 5, and then we'll reshoot that dramatic scene with the proper prop gun. This time, if you please, Mr. Presley." The crew cheered, a few even applauding. The mood on set was no longer one of professional tension, but of camaraderie and shared amusement. Elvis felt a rush of warmth, a genuine feeling of connection with the people around him. He hadn't just pulled a prank. He'd inadvertently reminded everyone that even in the most serious of professions, a little bit of unexpected joy could be exactly what was needed. King of rock and roll had just become the king of the water gun, and somehow it felt even better. During the impromptu 5-minute break that Arthur Finch had called, the set remained abuzz with chatter and lingering chuckles. The air felt palpably lighter, almost buoyant. People were stretching, smiling, and reliving the moment of the great squirt. It was a completely different atmosphere than the usual hurried, serious breaks. Elvis was chatting with Sterling Vance, who was still marveling at the prank. "I truly had no idea," Elvis Sterling said, shaking his head. "For a second there, I thought I'd lost my mind. I was like, did that man just spit at me?" They both laughed. Then a hand clapped Elvis on the shoulder. It was Arthur Finch. His eyes, though still carrying a residual twinkle of amusement, were now serious again. But not stern. There was an unexpected softness in them. "My office?" Finch asked, his voice low, but not authoritarian. It was an invitation, not a command. Elvis's heart gave a slight flutter. Was this the real reprimand, now that the immediate shock and amusement had worn off? He followed Finch to a small temporary office set up near the edge of the studio, a space usually reserved for intense private discussions. Finch closed the door behind them, muffling the lingering sounds of the cheerful set. He sat down behind a cluttered desk, gesturing for Elvis to take the chair opposite him. The director leaned back, crossing his arms, and regarded Elvis with a steady gaze. So Finch began, his voice surprisingly gentle. "A water gun. What possessed you, son?" Elvis hesitated, searching for the right words. "Mr. Finch, I know it was unprofessional. I truly do apologize for disrupting the set. It was a crazy impulse." Finch held up a hand. No, I'm not angry, Elvis." "Honestly? Shocked?" "Yes, amused profoundly so. But not angry," he sighed, running a hand over his face. "Truth be told, I haven't laughed like that in I don't know how long." He looked at Elvis, a weary honesty in his eyes. "This business, Elvis, it's relentless, the pressure, the schedules, the endless demands for perfection. Sometimes you forget to breathe." Elvis nodded. He understood completely. That was exactly how he'd been feeling. "I've been so focused on getting this picture," right, Finch continued, his voice softening even more. "On every shot, every line, every nuance. I push everyone, myself included. Sometimes I forget that the people on set aren't just cogs in the machine. They're human beings." He gave a small wry smile. "You certainly reminded me of that, Mr. Presley." "I just felt I don't know a bit disconnected," Elvis admitted, feeling bolder now that Finch was being so open. "Like we were all just going through the motions. The energy felt low. I saw that water gun and it was just this crazy idea that popped into my head. I thought, what if we just broke the tension for a second?" He shrugged. "It was a big risk, I know." Finch chuckled softly. "A very big risk indeed. You're lucky I wasn't having one of my worst days. You might have found yourself cleaning bathrooms." He winked, and Elvis realized the director was actually cracking a joke. "But seriously," Elvis Finch continued, his tone turning more reflective. "It was enlightening. This set for weeks now has been a pressure cooker. Everyone's exhausted, and you, in one absurd, brilliant moment, just popped the lid." He leaned forward, his gaze direct. "You've got a rare gift, Elvis, not just for performing, but for connecting with people, for bringing a spark. Don't ever lose that." Elvis felt a profound sense of relief and gratitude. He hadn't expected this. He'd expected a lecture, a threat, perhaps even a demand for an apology to the entire crew. Instead, he found understanding and even a strange kind of camaraderie. "Thank you, Mr. Finch," Elvis said genuinely. "It means a lot to hear you say that." Finch smiled, a genuine warm smile that transformed his usually stern face. "All right, then let's get back to it. We have a movie to finish, and don't worry about the actual prop gun." Gus found it. He motioned towards the door. "Just try to stick to the script for the rest of the week, okay, King?" Elvis grinned. "I'll do my best, sir." He walked out of the office, feeling lighter, more invigorated than he had in days. King had risked it all for a laugh, and somehow he'd found not just laughter, but unexpected respect and understanding from the most serious man on set. The water gun incident became an instant legend on set. The whispered retelling of the great squirt spread like wildfire, each version growing grander and more hilarious. But beyond the immediate amusement, a palpable shift occurred in the set's atmosphere. The oppressive tension that had weighed down everyone for weeks seemed to have dissipated, replaced by a lighter, more cooperative spirit. Director Arthur Finch, while still demanding and focused, carried himself differently. The subtle lines of stress around his eyes seemed softer. He still barked out commands, but there was an underlying current of good humor. He was even seen on occasion cracking a small smile during takes, something unheard of before. He had always been respected, but now he seemed approachable, more human. Crew, too, seemed to have shed some of their weary professionalism. The hurried, grim efficiency was still there, but now punctuated by moments of genuine camaraderie. During setup changes, crew members joked with each other more freely. Small acts of kindness and unexpected humor started to ripple through the production. A grip might leave a silly drawing on a prop master's clipboard. A makeup artist might hum a jaunty tune while working. One afternoon, during a particularly complex lighting setup, the air conditioning unit on set decided to malfunction. The heat became stifling, and everyone started to wilt. Finch, instead of demanding they power through, clapped his hands together. "All right, everyone, ice cream truck!" A collective cheer went up. Finch had actually arranged for a local ice cream truck to pull up outside the studio gates, and for 15 glorious minutes, the entire cast and crew enjoyed cool treats, laughing and commiserating about the heat. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. It was something the pre-water gun Finch would never have considered. Elvis, too, felt the change deeply. He still had long hours and demanding scenes, but the work no longer felt like a soul-crushing grind. He felt more connected to the people around him, not just as colleagues, but as individuals who shared a unique, slightly absurd experience. He found himself more open, more spontaneous in his performances, channeling the genuine joy and mischief he'd rediscovered. During a lunch break, Stella, his co-star, came up to him. "You know, Elvis," she said, a thoughtful look on her face, "this set hasn't felt this good since, well, ever you really did something, didn't you?" Elvis shrugged, smiling. "Just trying to keep things interesting. It's more than that. Finch usually looks like he's about to spontaneously combust from stress. Now he actually looks like he's enjoying himself, and everyone else too. He reminded us that it's okay to laugh even when the stakes are high." He saw the water gun now cleaned and placed in a display cabinet in the prop master's workshop, a silent testament to its impact. Gus, the prop master, even winked at Elvis when he caught his eye. It seemed the secret of its original owner had faded, and it had become simply Elvis's water gun. The scene that had been interrupted by the squirt eventually got reshot. Elvis, now using the actual prop gun, delivered his lines with newfound intensity and a subtle undercurrent of warmth in his eyes. The villain, Sterling Vance, still flinched dramatically, but this time he caught Elvis's eye and gave a quick, almost imperceptible wink before continuing the scene. The energy felt shared and genuinely exciting. The movie production, though still adhering to its tight schedule, moved forward with a different rhythm. There were still challenges, of course, but now there was a collective resilience, a shared understanding that made the difficulties easier to bear. The water gun hadn't just created a moment of laughter. It had created a new culture on set, one that valued human connection and the unexpected joy found in breaking the mold. Elvis had started a ripple, and its effects were spreading far beyond a single silly squirt. Days turned into weeks, and the movie production steadily marched towards its completion. As the final scenes were filmed, director Arthur Finch often found himself reflecting on the water gun incident. It had been more than just a momentary break in the routine. It had been a profound wake-up call, a splash of cold water, pun intended, that had reset his perspective. He had always prided himself on his control, his ability to manage every aspect of a demanding film set. Constant pressure had turned him into a tightly wound spring, always on the verge of snapping. He'd seen the exhaustion in his crew's eyes, the forced smiles of his actors, and had simply dismissed it as the unavoidable cost of making art. He believed that intensity and humor were mutually exclusive, that a serious production required a serious, even grim, atmosphere. Elvis's prank had shattered that belief. Collective laughter, the palpable relief that swept through the set, had been undeniable. He remembered the feeling of that deep, chest-shaking laugh, how it had physically released tension he hadn't even realized he was holding. It had been a catharsis, not just for him, but for everyone. He began to notice things he hadn't before, the way his camera operator's shoulders slumped at the end of a long day. Quiet sigh of the costume designer, struggling with a difficult scene. He started encouraging short, impromptu breaks. More often he'd tell a bad joke. He'd even occasionally pull out a small toy himself, a rubber duck, a squishy stress ball, and set it on his monitor during a particularly intense scene just to remind himself, and subtly his crew, not to take everything quite so. King seemed to move with more genuine lightness, his performances imbued with a renewed spark. He was still professional, still hit his marks, but there was an unmistakable joy in his eyes, a playful energy that had been missing. Finch realized that by trying to control every aspect of the creative process, he had inadvertently stifled the very thing that made his actors, and especially Elvis, so compelling: their spontaneous, vibrant humanity. One evening, after wrapping a particularly successful shot, Finch stayed behind watching the crew pack up. The usual hurried clatter was replaced by a more relaxed conversational pace. He overheard a grip telling a joke to a gaffer, and both burst into laughter. It was a good sound, a healthy sound. He walked over to the prop master's cabinet and looked at the water gun. It was a cheap plastic toy, yet it had accomplished what no amount of stern direction or intense pressure could. It had brought a sense of humanity and warmth back to a grueling, high-stakes environment. Finch found himself thinking about his own life outside the set. How had his relentless pursuit of perfection affected his relationships, his personal joy? He realized he'd been living in a constant state of high alert, his emotions tightly controlled. The water gun had served as a powerful reminder that sometimes the most profound insights come from the most unexpected and seemingly trivial places. He decided then and there that he would approach future projects differently. He wouldn't compromise on quality or vision, but he would make a conscious effort to foster a more humane, joyful atmosphere. He would remember the power of a shared laugh, the importance of letting go even for a moment. He would remember the water gun. As the last lights were turned off and the studio plunged into a temporary darkness before the next day's work, Arthur Finch smiled. He had spent his career perfecting the art of cinematic drama. But thanks to a playful king and a simple plastic toy, he had just learned a more important lesson: the art of living. And that, he realized, was a scene worth savoring. The final day of shooting arrived marked by a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. There was the usual rush to get everything done, but beneath it a current of camaraderie and even affection flowed through the set. The water gun incident had indeed become a legend, whispered about with knowing smiles and shared chuckles. Elvis felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not just from completing the film, but from the shift he'd witnessed on set. He'd arrived feeling like a machine, a famous figure trapped by expectation. He left feeling like a human being again, connected to the creative process and to the people who shared it with him. The simple act of mischief had reawakened his own spirit, reminding him of the playful, authentic heart that had made him the king in the first place. As the crew packed up for the last time, there was a celebratory atmosphere. Finch is standing a little taller, his eyes twinkling words of thanks. When he got to Elvis, he paused. Elvis, Finch said, his voice softer than usual. "It's been an experience, a truly unique one." He extended his hand and Elvis took it. Finch's grip was firm, warm. "Thank you for everything." "Thank you, Mr. Finch," Elvis replied, looking him in the eye. "For being a good sport, and for letting me bring a little splash to the party." Finch chuckled, a deep rumbling sound that had become much more frequent these past few weeks. "Just try not to make a habit of it, King. My heart might not take it." He winked. "But seriously, you have a talent for bringing out the best in people, even grumpy old directors like me." Their gaze held for a moment, a shared understanding passing between them. It wasn't just a handshake between an actor and a director. It was a connection forged in an unexpected moment of shared humanity and laughter. Months later, when the movie premiered, it was a success. Critics praised the performances, particularly Elvis's, noting a newfound depth and naturalness in his acting. Audiences loved it. But for those who had been on set, the film carried an invisible secret layer. They knew the story behind the magic, the moment a prop gun became a water gun, and how it had transformed a grueling production into a joyful collaboration. The water gun itself became a treasured memento. Finch had it framed and hung in his personal office, a constant reminder of the day. He learned that laughter wasn't a distraction from work, but an essential ingredient for it. He would sometimes tell the story to new, overly serious crew members on future sets, and watch their faces soften with amusement. He even began to incorporate small, fun days into his future film schedules, a way to lighten the mood and foster connection among his teams. Elvis, in his own career, carried the lesson with him. He continued to work hard, to be dedicated, but he never again let the grind completely erase his joyful spirit. He looked for moments to infuse authenticity, humanity, and, yes, a bit of unexpected fun into his work. He understood that true performance wasn't just about hitting marks or delivering lines. It was about connecting, about being real, about finding the joy in the unexpected. Years later, people would still talk about Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. But for a select few who were there on that movie set in 1960, he would also forever be the king of the water gun. It was a small act of rebellion, a silly prank, but it had a profound, heartwarming legacy. It proved that sometimes the most powerful messages are delivered not with a bang, but with a simple, unexpected squirt of water, reminding everyone that even under the brightest lights, the most important thing is to remember to be human, to laugh, and to let a little bit of joy splash onto the serious canvas of life.